Some of my peoples one time.
What up, what up, what up? I know she hates that. What up, what up, what up? This is Across the Intersection podcast.
Hello,
this is
listening
AJ.
audience. We are
I'm in here with
appreciating-
this is AJ. I'm in here with Avery and Eve.
Hey,
Hey,
We all
everybody.
back in the saddle. It's been a couple weeks since we've
Been a
been
while.
able to get it in.
been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a little while, but as always, you can ingest our podcast on Apple Podcast, on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, and SoundCloud.
I thought you guys were going to do like 12 while I was away, but I came back and it was one. What's going on here?
It's hard in these streets, man. It's hard when you're juggling. I'm that true Jamaican. I got 15 jobs.
You're lazy.
so-
You're lazy.
I just dated myself. If you don't know early '90s sitcom,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about right there.
And Eve, word was on the digital streets that you went to Wakanda to get some vibranium. Is that is that what's been going on?
Quite the opposite direction. I
Okay.
was in the great land called Indonesia.
Ah.
Actually, it's a series of 13,000 lands, but I was on the one called
that
Bali.
right?
And by the way, for the listening audience, Bali is highly recommended.
Now you got to be
Okay.
on that Cameron Darty payroll though to get out to. Can we get? Us commoners. I don't know if we can afford to go out to Bali.
Yeah.
Yes, you can actually.
Yeah.
It's really inexpensive. The thing that you have to be able to afford to do is sit in a plane for 13 hours just to get to China, and then you have to be able to sit in the plane again for 6 hours.
China?
to get down to Indonesia.
Come
so
on.
not everybody can do that. Yeah.
So did they? You know, when you went there, did they say Beyonce? Did they say Beyonce?
No, we did get quite.
Whitney Hutton.
But the great thing about
Whitney
the
Houston.
situation is that I was with two 6 foot tall negresses, so therefore I didn't get as much attention as they did.
Negress?
Yes,
Ah.
2 6 foot tall negresses.
Oh,
I am
okay.
just 5'7".
Y'all
and
be
so
throwing them new words out. I like
did
that.
I did not get as much attention as they did.
Hold up, Chaka. You're going to have to let us know
Did they- so did
when
they
did
say-
that negress thing come
Did
from.
they say, oh, my Kemetic, Nilotic, Nubian queen princess?
No, they didn't go.
Now, let
that,
me
they
ask
didn't
you
go
this,
that
though.
far.
$5. Did they?
A friend of mine, he and his wife went to Thailand last year.
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of stares? Because he was like, every dude was staring at his wife just like,
Okay, so this is it. Like I
you
said,
got you and the negresses.
well,
Did
that's
you?
the thing, in terms of all three of us. But again, I'm glad that I was not the 6 foot tall, one of the 6 foot tall ones, because I think that the reason that they got a lot of attention included their height.
They thought they was in the WNBA.
And but yeah, they're.
I'm just joking.
After the first,
I don't think they heard of the WNBA out there.
that's unfortunate. But after the first day, I decided not to look at people.
Respectfully.
Like literally in East Asia.
What do you mean by looking at people?
Well, what I'm saying is that because I want to be comfortable and I had to make a covenant with my eyes
Oh, okay.
to look at people that I'm talking to or to look into the distance, but
There was
not.
some swole Asian brothers out there.
You was trying to
I'm
get your groove
talking
back,
about.
Winston? You
I'm
ran into
talking
Winston
about
over there?
double consciousness.
Okay,
I'm talking
okay.
about. I did not want to have any form of double consciousness. I didn't want to look at myself through the eyes of people who were looking.
Okay,
Saying, man, we're not used to seeing melanated or more melanated people, especially when we spent 12 hours in China. Not as much when we were in
Well, they
Indonesia.
melanated. They got melanin.
That's what I'm saying. But
Well,
people
more, yeah,
with
she said more
hypermelanation,
melanated.
like we did.
Hypermelanation.
But I made
Talking
it
about swarthy
a
people?
point to, I made it a point to, after just a short period of time, I realized that I was noticing that, during the times when we would get attention, and I didn't want to notice that. I just wanted to enjoy my
Just
vacation.
enjoy yourself, I got you.
So that's why I decided to only talk to or look at people who I was talking to, and to have my sights in the distance, observing and enjoying myself. Otherwise, I would have been self-conscious, and I wasn't going to spend my vacation being self-conscious.
That's dope.
So, but it was but that was what I had personally had to do. Some people relish folks looking at them, so it really depends on the person. For me, I didn't have time to think about that, and I wanted to enjoy my vacation.
wonderful. That's
but
wonderful.
But more importantly, most of the vast majority of people were extremely gracious and nice, especially in Indonesia. But yeah, so you do have people who aren't used to seeing, and then also in Bali, the majority of the tourists are Australian.
Good eye, mate.
Yeah, because
Is that what they
Australia
said?
yeah, is
That's
just
racist.
south of there.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
racist,
south
right?
of there. Yeah.
And
Yeah, it
then
was just
there were a
little bit.
lot of Dutch people because unfortunately the Dutch colonized Indonesia and turned it upside down. And maybe at one point I'll talk to you guys about that
Shout out to the
because
Dutch.
some of the Indonesians actually talked to us about how the Dutch came, colonized them, and would not allow them to consume their own coffee.
Wow.
Yeah, they basically wanted to rape the land and
Oh,
so
yeah.
forth. And
we
then
know how
after
that
the
go.
Dutch left, the Japanese came and did the same. But the point is that so there were Dutch, there were Australians, there were people from other parts of
So
Europe.
did you see any
people-
Aborigines from
No,
Australia?
and when I say Australian, unfortunately, I'm not talking about the black fellas.
Okay. Because there are also Aborigines in Bali. That's the people that are from there. That's what
Yeah.
Aborigine means.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And by the way, one of the Aussies that we spoke to said that Aborigine is not a good word, so they like to call themselves black fellas or indigenous people.
Or indigenous.
Yeah,
right.
in terms of with respect to the Australians, yeah, and then there were a decent number of tourists who were from China. So my point is that there were Black American tourists. We ran into Russell Simmons, by the way, over there.
Oh,
yeah.
so that's what he
Yeah.
ran into, huh?
And,
Now, did he have you? Did he invite you to a yoga session?
no, he didn't. He was just walking. We were going down to a waterfall, and he was walking from
Those
it.
Me
Is
Too
that right?
cats chase Russell all the way across
Did
the
he,
world.
now, when he saw you,
Crazy.
did he wave to you while he was bending over and folding in a pretzel
I'll keep it moving,
like he does on the
So-
internet?
So, but no,
okay.
but again, so there were
Just checking.
maybe each day we didn't see any more than a
they
dozen
done chased that man
a
to Bali.
dozen black people. So it's not black folks are not people that they would see. And when I say blacks, I mean people of non South,
Hyper-melanated.
non Southeast Asian descent.
Now, when you saw Russell Simmons,
He was
Oh,
gonna talk about
Lord.
Russell Simmons.
did he use his rush card? I'm just wondering. Like,
on.
did it clear out there?
I didn't use the rush card,
Probably why I
and
had
he
to go to
wasn't
Bali
using.
because
I don't think
they
he
got
was
like
using,
a $2 limit on that thing. So.
Crazy.
Okay.
So you're talking about things from 10 years ago, but I understand.
Okay.
Supposedly the rush card is a little better than it used to be.
Woo.
But,
Okay.
But yeah, so but he was gracious, but I definitely didn't run after him. I didn't realize it was him until I saw one person who I think he was traveling with, and then I looked back to see the other melanated person behind him, and I was like, "Oh, hello, Mr. Simmons." He nodded. I nodded, and we went on about our business.
You about to get that man caught up. All three of y'all. Y'all about to sexual chocolate that man.
But
Come
but
on
no,
now.
but it was
You
a
done been through a lot.
fantastic trip, and fellow Globetrotters out there, Bali is the spot.
Oh, that might be one I have to add to my bucket list. But yeah, so we glad to have Eve back in the building. Yeah.
Just stunned on everybody,
Yeah,
right?
I know. Right?
Like,
She just
well,
came in on Bali food.
yeah, I was
West
just watching.
Side.
I just been watching the playoffs.
You
Hey,
know, right?
the Caps are in the Stanley Cup Finals. Can you believe
Wow,
that?
that's
Yeah,
incredible.
you know,
They-
I've been trying to humor these cats that be like, yeah, the Caps. I'm like, yeah, I don't really care about
Yeah,
hockey.
but I mean,
I'm
you,
just like, I don't.
yeah. I mean, be that as it may, you know, like they
Is the
it's
Snaggletooth dude still on that
I
team?
don't know. I haven't watched one game, but I keep my ear to these sports streets. So they made the finals. I'm happy about that. I'm happy about that because I know people were counting them out from getting them knocked out when they were going to lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins and all that. So
Shout out to anybody who listens who watches hockey.
yeah,
I don't watch
no,
hockey, so
nobody watches hockey. But
yeah, I'm just like
swarthy people played hockey.
yeah,
You
shout
know
out to
that
the
in
swarthy people that play
Canada.
hockey.
Yeah.
I wasn't one of them, so
Swarthy means dark skin. by the way.
Atlanta has a number of people of color on their team, and then there are a couple of Canadian teams. So people don't realize that there are black folks in the NHL.
Yeah.
I don't-
There's a book that talks about the
Oh, yeah.
Swarthy and Tawny people in the that played hockey in Canada. They had their own league.
So speaking of something else that was a paradox, right?
That I like that transition.
Black hockey players. We've been sort of tabling a couple things until Eve got back to talk
Dang,
about
put
with
some
this,
pressure on me. I don't have anything to say. I'm chilling.
No, you're not chilling, Bali. That's your new nickname, Bali Simmons.
Putting a bit out there.
Officially, I reject that one. I
okay,
reject
all right.
that. Yeah.
All right, so for the record, you reject Bali Simmons. Okay, duly noted, counsel. Anyway, so this we've been talking about this black Christian paradox, right?
Woo!
Or the notion of a black
Yeah,
There you go,
Christian
no
using
paradox.
those terms. Black and Christian. There you go, using those terms. You know me in terms. Anyway, continue.
Every term except swarthy and tawny, right?
There you go,
right.
Swarthy
From a
Tawny.
century and a half
believer
ago.
of the-
Exactly.
Swarthy Tawny.
Any term
believer
from
of the
antiquity.
believer of the biblical narrative. But continue.
It's got to be from antiquity for Avery to participate in that joint. But this notion, as Eve said, of a black Christian paradox. And so we've been chatting about a lot of different things. I think the last time we talked about identity, and we've been talking about just some of the things that's been popping up where you just kind of, as a believer, you just kind of got to look and just shake your head like, yo, man.
Or not look at all.
Or not look at all.
By the way, AJ, when you say as a believer, because that word is being used a lot, what do you mean by believer? Because there could be someone who logs into this or listens to this podcast
You're right.
just once and says,
You're
believers. Right. Believer in what? Believer that the color red is red? What belief are they talking about?
You're right. You know what? So I guess I should have done this when we did part 1, huh? I didn't. So if you read the book of John, see, I wasn't trying to do my preface, but I'm going to do my preface now, guys. We're going to get a little Bible-y here. She asked the question, so I got to get Bible-y.
Bible, read it.
John chapter 1 says that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then in verse 14, it says, then that Word became flesh and dwelt amongst mankind. That Word becoming flesh was our Messiah that we believe in, that he died on the cross for our sins, right? And here we are in 2018, believers in that truth. So when I say believer, that is what I'm talking about.
Okay, so you're precluding people who accept the "Thus saith the Lord" Old Testament, who accept that only as the scripture and reject the New Testament and the notion of a New Testament Messiah. Are you precluding those folks?
Oh no, they are believers in something else. I'm just saying. So when you hear me say the term believer, that's what I'm talking about.
You're talking about those who believe in the Messiah of the New Testament.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The Messiah of the New Testament who actually pre-existed before the Old Testament. Yeah, that Messiah. See, because a lot of times we
according to the New Testament. Yeah.
According to the New Testament. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So here we are. Believers.
Yes. Go ahead.
Who are of African descent.
Okay.
Who live in a Western context. Here we are. Right.
All right. There are indigenous.
That's
indigenous Swarthy and Tawny people here,
and that's
copper-colored.
And that's the reason that I've been saying melanated lately,
people.
because there's some people who believe that that quote unquote black people. There's some who actually did not originate within recent centuries in Africa.
Well, yeah, that's actually written down.
Yeah, supposedly, and I haven't seen this primary source yet, but supposedly when you look at Columbus and other people's primary sources, they will. They've actually written that they've seen people that we would describe as black, broad-nosed, full-lipped, dark people when they arrived here.
Well, that's why I'm saying of African
and they didn't
descent.
necessarily come through Mansa Musa. That's why I will say melanated.
There's a man, there's an explorer. You have bunches of explorers: Marco Polo, Magellan, Ibn Fadlan, a lot of different explorers. You have a guy by the name of Giovanni di Verrazzano. There's a bridge in New York that connects Brooklyn to Staten Island called the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. A very popular bridge. It's huge.
Well, it's not that popular if you got paid a toll going across that joint.
The toll is
ridiculous.
I run through it. Okay. Well, it's not the Verrazzano. You're talking about the Goethals Bridge. That's what it is.
And the Verrazzano, both of them.
All right, well,
I got family.
They must tax you because,
But get back to Mr. Verrazzano. Mr. Verrazzano.
Yeah, I don't pay taxes. I'm just playing.
Woo, you might have to cut that.
I'm just playing. Nah,
he was serious.
Giovanni di Verrazzano wrote down when he explored what was at a point afterward became the Carolinian colonies, which we know now as North and South Carolina. You had the Chesapeake colonies, you had the Carolinian colonies, you had the New England colonies, you had these different colonies, Dutch colonies. Anyway, he had wrote down that there are people a little bit taller than us that are their skin is darker than us, and they look like what we refer to as Ethiopian. Mm-hmm. That's what they said. Their hair was
textured,
curly, but they had their hair tied in like a bow that went behind their back, and you can see drawings, and it looks like they have it tied in a ponytail, And when they say Ethiopian, just to be clear, because when we think Ethiopian, we think, hey, how you doing? Like Eritrean and all of that.
Those people who speak Amharic.
Yes, Amharic. Yeah. A combination of Yes, in the Horn of Africa. And so-
However, the real definition of the word Ethiop.
yeah, Ethiopia or Ethiop means people of burnt faces, people with burnt faces. And so when the term Ethiopia or Ethiopian was used, that was a broad term that
Anybody
spoke
from
to
the continent. Yeah,
well,
right.
not just the continent, anybody that was darker than white and they came from the south, they were referred to in Greek terminology as Ethiopian. So there were Eastern Ethiopians and Western Ethiopians, Eastern being Dravidian, or what we refer to as Indian, like East India, those kind of people. And then also people who we tend to reference as African. Though they were all considered Ethiopian. And in fact, the Ethiopia that we know now used to be called Abyssinia. But,
Abyssinia,
yeah,
yeah.
Abyssinia. It became Ethiopia in the early 1900s. But to look at Ethiopia, the Ethiopia that we know now was never colonized. So if
Yeah.
you look at Ethiopia, like imagine a cake.
Not for lack of trying, because Italy tried.
Oh yeah, they tried for
Oh, yeah,
4
they
years.
tried,
they,
yeah.
they occupied for 4
Yeah.
years, but no, they tried much longer than that.
Right, yeah, absolutely. In the 1930s, it was a war, the
Ethiopian Italian War.
Yeah, exactly. And which kicked off the African Reformation, when they the African Independent Renaissance. When
Which
a lot of
lasted about
nations
20 years,
will
yeah.
claim, yeah, longer than that, like 60, 59 years, something, yeah. So
Well, I guess if you include all
yeah.
the way up to modern times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, up until 1994 with Nelson Mandela and African National Council and all that. But anyway, when he became president of Tanzania, which we now call South Africa. But anyway,
So
Ethiopia,
Verrazano-
if you think about it like a cake, right? Like land as a cake,
Mm-hmm.
and you grab like somebody comes with a knife, you grab a piece. AJ, you grab a piece. Listening audience grabs pieces. I don't grab a piece. I just leave it there. Well, what's left is cake, but that cake was bigger at one point,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. But all those pieces are gone. What's left is what's left, and that's what we call Ethiopia right now. You feel what I'm
Yeah, I
saying?
got you.
So that's why it's
definitely.
called Ethiopia.
I got
But
you.
but what
'Cause it was
Verrazano
all
did
Ethiopia.
when he came over
Yeah.
here and observed the people and wrote it down in his journal,
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, those people look like the people
Well, certainly.
that we are used to seeing and calling Ethiopian."
Yes, certainly, and there are copper colored people, or so many people ended up identifying as black. That was political and economic to erase history like that and lump everybody together. It's not unsimilar to the term white. And you have there's a group called the Shinnecock Indian. The Shinnecock Indian that's out of New York.
Up north here.
Yeah, in New York, and that is the group that ODB, Old Dirty Bastard, was a part of.
From the Wu.
Yeah, the RZA, he identifies as American Indian. The Jizza, because they were all related anyway.
Yeah,
You
they
see
were
the
like
Wu-Tang
cousins or
documentary.
whatever,
Yeah. But those they when we look at them, it's like, oh yeah, we think West Africa and whatnot. And that's not to say that the lineage doesn't necessarily come from the continent at some point, but they predate, and many of us here in the United States do predate colonial African slavery, because indigenous Americans were enslaved as well. We know that. So,
Yeah, we know that.
But it's also important to note that, yes, back in several centuries ago, the Mansa Musa actually did send delegations of people. By the way, Mansa Musa is the wealthiest, or was known to be the wealthiest man in human history. But supposedly he
Yeah.
sent delegations
in the 14th century.
of explorers to the West, and those people never
And they
returned.
never returned, yeah.
And so Ivan Van Sertima's book, They Came Before Columbus, and other works talk about those people. However, what you're talking about and what a lot of people nowadays are talking about are folks aside from anybody who could have come from or could have been descended from that particular group or those groups of people. We're talking about indigenous North Americans who even predated folks like that. So that's something that's interestingly starting to come out now, but I think it speaks to a bigger issue, which is we can't just say melanated people are automatically of African descent, although it's great to be of African descent. And even my DNA test says I'm of African descent. But of the part of the world that I just came from is a few clicks away from
Come
a
on.
place called, places called Micronesia,
Come
but
on.
even a more large place called
Come on.
Papua New Guinea. And when you look at Papua New Guineans, they look like you, Avery. I mean, clear.
Right.
They
With blonde hair?
literally no. Some of
Okay,
them,
not
a
with
lot
the
of them
blonde
don't
hair,
even
right,
have
they look
blonde
like
hair.
me.
Blonde hair, yeah.
But they look like you. There are people who are indigenous to Australia. There's this whole what I would call black belt in Southern Asia. A couple of the people we came across in Bali and in Indonesia in general were our complexion. So
Or darker.
yeah.
Well, this is, you know.
Facts.
Yeah, this is what, can happen. By the way, everybody, welcome to the Semantics Podcast, where we go on tangents. But, this is what happens when you look at a people as a monolith as opposed to, this is why I like to differentiate culture and ethnicity and identity from just a color, because you have to, from in one color there could be a myriad, and there is a myriad
is.
of ethnicities. There's
Absolutely.
a myriad of cultures buried within there. And so even when you say, okay, African American, just in that term, well, there's 55 countries in Africa.
we're gonna have to-
what are we talking about here?
Yeah, we're gonna have to blame Jesse Jackson for that one. I use the word blame on purpose.
Well, that's what happens when you have something new.
Yeah.
People
That's
don't
the thing.
understand that.
1987, I think. Or
But even
88.
if you go back 200 years, if you think about human history, 200 years is new.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's when you have most things that we talk about in human history happened organically, where most of the things in this country were created. So you have a group of people, millions of people, who were transported from one continent to another artificially, not organically. They didn't organically travel and was, searching the world. They were taken and brought for a purpose and then just sort of released.
Well, yeah, and
So-
and also you had indigenous people too that were all mixed in.
Right, but
That's
that's
what
not
you're
that.
saying,
That's
yeah.
not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who were brought
Oh,
here.
okay,
There were
yeah.
millions of
Right.
people brought here and just
Yeah,
placed
absolutely,
there.
yeah.
And so it's almost like when I watch sometimes the Nature Channel. What's it called? National Geographic, where sometimes animals that are not indigenous to a certain part of the world are introduced, and it just completely
Yeah, it's
throws off the
chaos, yeah.
ecosystem.
Interesting.
Well, think about that in human history, where you have millions of people brought from one place to another and released. You throw off the ecosystem almost. It's to use a term from nature. So you have a people group who essentially have to create a whole new culture.
Very good analogy,
And create.
very good.
They have to create. They have to literally create an ethnicity. So I don't. Although what Jesse Jackson and people of his ilk did, although what they did was limited, I understand, because you have millions of people who don't identify with indigenous people, who don't identify with Africans. So they have to essentially create an entire culture from scratch.
I think be that as it may, I think we would be naive to think that knowledge did not exist even then.
Oh, I'm not
It's
saying
not-
it didn't exist,
right.
but I'm saying you still have to walk it out. What I'm saying is,
And you also
people
have to
walk
exist
those things
within
out.
your context. And even if the people who are melanated in America right now come from all over the world, some of them are indigenous, some of them are African, some of them are from, are indigenous to Australia, New Zealand, whatever the situation is, if you have a similar experience among people who have similar features, even if we're different genetically, or even not genetically, but even if we're different in terms of tribe and ethnicity, or from totally different parts of the world, it does make sense that those people would say, let's come together and just call ourselves black, or let's call ourselves colored, or be called colored, or call ourselves African like we did back in the 1700s and the late 1600s, for the purpose of coming together and actually fighting this oppression.
we are way off where we were supposed
Right.
to talk
Yeah.
about.
No.
So
we wanna-
rather
But
than-
I just wanted to bring that up because now that a lot of knowledge is coming out, where people are realizing that some of the people who call themselves African American are actually not descended from Africa, or some people who look like we do are actually descended from North America or from different parts of the Americas or Africa. A lot of people are now sort of coming against those who would say black as a word to describe us. But what I'm saying is that we need to understand the context by which folks have coalesced and called themselves one thing, because they were being resisted by a whole society that has put them in the same category.
Ness, the reason why I say that is because
Wait, what did you just say?
Mess, yo.
yeah,
What?
I was just
okay.
portmanteauing. I was just combining yes and no.
Okay.
But the
Okay.
no, like actually, you have a group that was called black. They didn't call themselves that. You
Well,
had-
yeah,
That's
they
why-
were
that's
allowing
why I
themselves
made
to
it
be
in-
called black.
yeah, it was
Actually-
forced. So, and you have a group of people that called themselves white, and that was something that was implemented by the United States government. So they didn't force themselves to end up in this group. That was a military strategy in order to in order to secure and advance a nation. There is genetic variance. There is genetic difference, and I think, and that's something that gets lost a lot. That you find out when you get sick and you cannot get help, and people do not know what's wrong with you, and you end up passing away. There's a lot of genetic variance just because people have the same shade.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean
Okay,
that
good point.
we have the same genealogical proclivities, so to
And
speak.
I think if you look at
Yeah, good point.
was it Maslow's hierarchy? I understand what you're saying, but that's so far down the line when you're talking
But when you
about
look at the
people-
base of the pyramid,
right? When you look
people
at the
need
base, they have physical
identity.
needs and they need
Oh,
an
yeah.
identity.
Oh, yeah.
So I think what you're talking about is where we are just now getting to people starting to say, yeah, there are, but 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we're just scratching and
It
surviving.
was on some survival mode.
Right, exactly. And so if they're just if people are
KKK
just
standing
saying,
there. You're not standing looking at the
Well-
KKK talking about, actually, I'm of the Choctaw people of modern day. The KKK, the Klansman is looking at you saying, I'm going to lynch you anyway.
right, like I don't care, and that's where we have to
Yeah.
think in terms of reality. Like what you're saying is true, but we have to think in terms of reality. So
Because what I'm saying is not reality.
I'm talking
got
about reality in 150 years ago. 150 years ago, honestly, I don't think that was reality. Now in the 21st century, yes, it's reality.
What if
but
it was reality though? Because 120 years ago had to happen before right now. Like the knowledge that I'm saying is not knowledge that just
Yeah.
popped
if I'm
up.
running from slave trappers, dog, that's not reality.
No, you guys are saying the same thing. It's reality,
we are
but it's
saying
just
the same
not.
thing.
But it's not the reality of the person running from a slave catcher.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that's a reality of this of where this person is and the background and the backdrop of where this person is running from, the soil that they're running on. But the person who's running from a slave catcher isn't thinking about that. But can we use slave catcher to transition into our first topic?
So this is what happens. This is what happens when we don't record in like 2 weeks. We gonna have, so you guys just go ahead and buckle up. This might be a longer than normal episode, but anyway. So we were talking about initially, there's a black
Oh my God.
church. There's a church in Alabama, down in Birmingham, Alabama. It is the New Era Baptist Church. This is an Atlanta Black Star.
The New Era Fitted Cap Baptist Church.
5950 Baptist Church. Yeah. You know.
Okay.
We dating ourselves because Bama's don't wear those no more. So you know,
well,
I'm just
you
saying.
know.
I still like fitteds, but that's just me. Anyway,
They make fitteds in your
yeah, you know,
size?
when you got domes like this, you got to get a fitted.
I didn't know they had enough
you know.
material for that. You know,
If they can get over the bush, they can get over this. So anyway, New Era Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Pastor Michael Jordan, and I hate the fact his name is Michael Jordan.
Michael B. Jordan.
I don't know. This is just Pastor. We're gonna call him Pastor M. Jordan. That's
M.
what we're gonna
Jordan.
call him. So he put up a sign. What he did was he put up a sign outside his church. If you go to Twitter a lot, they have what's it called, highlights, and every Sunday
church
they,
signs.
yeah, they have church signs. Some of them are funny,
Yeah.
but this one isn't that funny. So this one, it says black folks need to stay out of white churches. I guess it is kind of funny. I'm sorry. He says black folks need to stay out of white churches.
Tweet that.
And so I know, right? Tweet that. Facts. Oh no, what's that? That coach. How's that for data?
I don't know what that is. I'm not on Twitter.
Oh, here we are. That's right. Yeah, I forgot. Oh, we never even gave. You see, we went off on that tangent. Didn't even tell people to give us the 5 stars on iTunes. Give me the 5 stars.
Good. That
Holla
means
at us
we didn't
on
do the same
social
thing we
media.
do every time.
Yeah, she was glad to not have to do that. So, but if you're on Twitter like me, I'm at Divinimous. You would have seen this. And so this cat puts up a sign. Now, the reason he did that, he didn't just do that for the sake of doing it. In that Birmingham area, there is a mega church. And you guys know what mega churches are. The big boys, right?
The Big Body Jones.
The Golden State Warriors of churches in Birmingham, Alabama.
The Lincoln Continentals
Yeah.
of
It's called the Church of the
Church
Highlands.
Fellowships.
It's called Church of the Highlands,
And it boasts 40,000 members.
It's Alabama's largest church. It has up to 40,000 members, at least on the roll. I don't know what that means, but it's 40,000 members on the roll. And what their plan is to do, because this church, New Era, of course, it exists in the more low-income part of the city. And so what Church of the Highlands is going to do is they're going to build a quote-unquote satellite campus. You know how they do.
Yeah,
They're going to build a
low income is code for colored.
Right. They're going to build in the urban, the urban context.
What we tend to say is black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're going to build one of their satellite campuses in the urban, quote unquote, low income side of town where Pastor M. Jordan's church happens to exist. And they have hired a quote unquote African American pastor. This is the pattern. I say that they've hired a black pastor. He is the only black pastor on their leadership team, Mr. Mayo Sowell, to head the new worship center. Praise the Lord.
That just so happens to be in the lower income.
It just happens to be in
what
the
a
low.
coincidence.
What a coinky dink, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
We just stumbled across this black dude who happens to be a church leader.
Look at God, as
Right.
they say.
And so in response to that,
You guys know the outcry would have been ridiculous if the pastor assigned to that particular
of
satellite
course.
location was white. I just wanted to say that.
of course.
Yeah.
They should have hired
The outcry would have been great.
You know
Well,
what?
yes.
You know what would have been funny if they would have hired like a Hispanic pastor and said it was just for people of color. But that's another thing.
Indian.
Or an Indian, right? Just people
That'd
of
be
color.
pretty funny.
So, in response to that, this pastor,
I'm sorry, that's funny. That's really funny, actually.
M. Jordan puts up that sign that says black folks need to stay out of white churches. Now, I want to separate the message from the messenger, which is not always the best thing to do, only because this cat, he said some outlandish stuff before.
Now, didn't the sign say two things though? One thing on the front and one thing on the other side of the sign.
But I just wanted to focus on
Oh.
I just wanted to focus
You
on
can cut that out. Clip that. Clip that.
What did the other side of the sign say? It was in the article. Where is it?
White people didn't want to live with us
Yeah,
before.
you don't want to live next door to us. So why do you want to put your church here if you don't know it? Yeah, no. So this is why I want to separate the message from the messenger, because this cat, M. Jordan, has said a bunch of outlandish things in the past, even things that the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, has come out against, has spoken out against. He said things like AIDS was God's response to homosexual lifestyle, that white churches are a slave master church or plantation religion. So he's said outlandish things before. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because when somebody who has said outlandish things speaks again, we just normally tune them out. Right?
Typically nullify anything that they say, even if it has some
validity, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to kind of separate the two, because this dude, when you look him up a little bit, he is a little outlandish. But I think in this particular instance, I at least can understand his sentiment. I can understand why he would feel that way for two reasons. First, obviously, I think it's kind of ridiculous that another church would feel that of all the other churches that exist in that city, why would I need to create another satellite campus instead of just trying to support?
I have to respond to that, especially being someone who has come from the Reformed tradition. And one thing about the Reformed, I don't know if, basically, it's a notion of biblical Christianity, an idea that we actually ascribe to what the Bible says, as opposed to adding things to the scripture.
My issue with sola scriptura.
Yeah, specifically things like, the five solas, including sola scriptura, scripture alone. We go by the scripture, and of course,
as you interpret it,
and again, that's
because people interpret one thing.
But the point is that
ways, right?
But the point is that those of us of Reformed tradition don't believe that we look through a lens. We believe that we see the scripture for exactly what it says.
Okay.
I said I came from a Reformed tradition because I am not necessarily, still
for you.
believing all of that. But that's what I have come. But what I'm trying to tell you is that I'm about to slap you, Avery. But what I'm trying to tell you is this: that I don't know if Highlands is a Reformed tradition church. What I will say though is that if it is, then it doesn't regard that there might have been other churches in that
I got
particular
you.
area because there is a doctrinal difference. So
I
if
got
you
you.
believe that the churches that are already there, even if they're 150, 200 years old, are in false doctrine, then yes, you definitely feel the need to plant
I got
there your own church with real doctrine so that you can reach out to the lowly people of low income areas
Those
with the
inferior-
truth of the gospel.
Those inferior Negroes
Stop.
that
Highly
Hey,
emotional,
hey, hey,
running laps
Highland-
around churches.
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
we want
that-
to teach them
that
the
just
truth.
Don't
Hey,
have
Highland
the truth.
hired their black pastor, man.
They're
Relax,
just,
man. Relax, bro.
they're
Mayo
just not-
Sowell, he got
They're
it.
not as intelligent as
But see, this is my issue. You know,
as the other group is. So
we've
the other group
talked
has to
about
come
this
in
before.
and set them straight
In
because they're like
terms of-
children.
oh, here we go.
Hey,
But like children is something that we've been accused of for the past almost 400 years.
Ooh,
But
there
see,
you go.
this is
I
my
was
issue
giving the
as,
world. I ain't
as
make
we've
it.
talked about before in terms of
I don't agree.
that whole sola scriptura thing, right? Because if that's what I believe, you're going in complete opposition to two scriptures I can think off the top of my head, where it says, "Get to know those who labor among you." So even if you think you might be doctrinally different, at least find out what they're doing. That's one, right? That's in the
And maybe
Bible.
Highlands has, and maybe they haven't. Go ahead.
I mean, I told you I'm cynical, so I'm gonna doubt that. Not that they haven't, but I doubt it. Right? And two, the Bible says that we're all members of one body. Each joint supplies. Maybe there's something that you have that they need. You can supply that.
Well, there are members of one body as long as that one body is Highlands.
There you go. So this is my whole, my whole notion about that sola scriptura piece. But that's neither here nor there. So Highlands comes in, hires their black pastor. They're because Highlands actually has 16 branch locations. They like SunTrust out this joint.
16 branch locations you can just pull up of the drive-through.
That's
Like
really
a drive-through scripture just comes shooting out through the pneumatic tube. Boom! And you just, okay, I'm good for the week. That's crazy. I thought that is insane. So anyway, he's come out and he's been interviewed by the local news people, WVTM, and he's done his little local news circuit or whatever. The other point about it is, and I don't, this guy is not, he's not exempt, because on the flip side of that coin, where the one side is, okay, I get it, this big church is trying to come in and not trying to work with you guys, they just want to come in and take over.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, let's keep it 100.
They're going to empty out the other church.
Right, exactly. You looking at your bread, and they're gonna come in and empty out your church, and you are looking at your bottom line, which again leads to my cynicism about most of these institutions.
Member transfership.
Exactly.
Well, and that presents a big question. This is just a question, not an assumption, about Christianity as expressed in
Oh, no,
America.
go ahead and assume. That's what we do here.
And that question is, are we going out and making disciples according to the Great Commission, or do we see just a transfer, as Avery just alluded to, of membership from one church to the next? So I would like to know more. Maybe one of these organizations that actually does these stats has an answer to this. But how many people are actually being snatched up from their corporate offices or suburbs or streets or from wherever and believing the gospel of the Messiah of the New Testament fresh? And how many people are switching from church to church?
Yeah.
And then those are the numbers that
I
we're
wouldn't be
actually...
surprised if Barna or Pew has a research or has a study done on. I'll look it up, but it wouldn't shock me that they probably have some study done about something like that. So anyway, I just thought that it was very unfortunate that, as most things in this particular country, even in the faith, it's very discouraging for me that it always comes down to black and white, which it shouldn't, because the Bible that we claim to read says we should no longer regard one another according to the flesh. Like, this is literally a literal scripture.
Yes.
But when it comes to Highlands, if Highlands actually looked at their past, or looked at the past of white American Christianity, or Christianity as expressed in white America over the centuries, and has noticed the segregation that was brought about by white Christianity, and has decided that in this day and time they want to do something different. They want to embed within black communities. Why they didn't choose middle class black communities, I don't know. They chose a poor one, which is what they tend to do, is if
Easy to
those
manipulate.
poor
And
communities
land is cheap,
actually
too.
reflect black communities. But anyway, what if they said, we don't want to go the way of our predecessors and just continue to segregate. Let's see if we can be involved in these Black communities and plant there and actually help people to understand historic and Orthodox biblical faith, and actually even put a Black pastor over it. We want to do something different than what we've done in the past. What would you guys say about that?
Well, I would say it's not different, because if you go and you read the Mohawk Conference papers from 1890, what to do about the question of the Negro, you can look this up. This is something that is actually, it's published on archive.org. I've seen it on scribd.com. You can look it up. You can search it online. And when you read this, it's so powerful. It's unfortunate that it's not really more done on it, but I'm not surprised because of how controversial the nature of the conference was. But
what does something from 1890 have to do with this situation?
Very good question. Well, in the Mohawk Conference of Mohonk, that's Mohonk Conference of 1890, that took place in Mohonk, upstate New York, was a conference that came about after the election of our president Rutherford B. Hayes in 1977. It was a trade-off that 1877. Where there was a trade-off that said that, okay, well, he would be accepted as being elected if troops were withdrawn from the South that protected colored people from white onslaught. And so
post-slavery,
which allowed for Reconstruction to take place. And so when he became president, then you had the withdrawal of these troops, and after that, he wanted to have a conference to figure out how do we address the issue of of colored people, or the Negro. They had conferences about what to do about the quote unquote Indian, and so they had questions about the Negro, and that's when this conference came about. Anyway, in some of these papers you can read, and you'll see that there was a gigantic initiative from the major denominations of quote unquote religion or Christianity, that being the Presbyterian and the Episcopalian. From what I can from what my research has shown me, and I want to put Baptists in there as well, but they would embed themselves, and they would set up churches, they would set up trading schools, they would set up elementary schools.
Wait. So you're saying the notion of being missional, which our generation has just come into contact with over the past decade, about having missional churches that are embedding in communities. You're saying that's not new? Yeah,
I'm saying that's not new. That's been going on for hundreds of years. And in fact, that was really the only way that a lot of resources some resources were distributed, particularly certain kinds of trade education was matriculated throughout what became known as the Black community.
So what was wrong with that?
Well, you have something called syncretism. So the problem with a lot of that, it was a view. Now some of it did have value based on the circumstances that you were in. Because if you're in a particular environment where you needed an education in order to earn an income, and they were the only people providing it, otherwise you're left to rot, unfortunately, then it would make sense to participate and to go to this particular school. They learned certain things like sewing, but they focused a lot on the women, not so much the men. There was a huge emphasis on the women. So it's actually this whole idea of more women or women being in school. I'm independent woman, college graduate, and all of that. There was a big emphasis.
You had to shake like that.
There was big. There was big emphasis. There was big emphasis on that back in as early as 1890 and before. But I bring that up just to say that it's not a new thing as far as what's happening in Alabama. Those gigantic churches have been trying to save the savage, so to speak. That's not anything new.
And that's the frustrating part is, if you could just call it what it is, right? Yeah. We're going to send resources to these underprivileged neighborhoods. Okay, if you're going to call it that and just do that, then just say that. But when there's this mixture, right? And we've talked about syncretism on here ad nauseum. When there's this mixture of things, and we're going to guise it under the name of mission or being missional. It's like, but that's not really what you're doing, right? That's not really your intention.
What is their intention? What do you assume their intention to be that they have not communicated?
Well, this is what we're just saying. Let's just keep it, or again, just keep it in 100. If you're providing resources to people who have been generationally underprivileged, they're easier to manipulate. In underprivileged areas, like Avery just said, the property is cheaper. I mean, we live in D.C. area. That's what's going on now. That's why they're coming in. We can come in and say, what, that's that? Oh, let me get some of that.
Yeah, and yes, and to be clear, according to the Federal Housing Authority, mixture. You have 3 types of areas, right? You have and this has to do with like redlining and all of that. You have a homogeneous white area, then you have an intra-racial area.
Yeah, like a mixed.
And then you have a homogeneous African American or homogeneous colored area, and the property value is its highest in homogeneous white areas, and that is by design by the Federal Housing Authority and the Veterans Affairs Office.
Look up
in the United
redlining.
States. Yeah. Well, there's a book I'm reading called The Color of Law.
I mean, all of that is the source of the wealth gap that exists in the United States right now.
Yeah.
But this speaks to
my
your
question,
point why you asked why they don't go to middle class black neighborhoods.
So
that's
why.
Why.
What I'm saying is that you are walking money, right? You are an asset, right? We all are assets in this country, in the United States, based on how this economy works, right? And so they have tagged you as having colored skin to be of less monetary value than a Caucasian that obviously they have Caucasian skin. They have a higher value. So when they go and they move into a particular area that you occupy, by definition, because it now becomes intra-racial, the value of that area, the value of those homes gets higher. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
sounds like the gentrification issue that we were talking about.
So that's why sometimes I just expect, and maybe it's still me, unfortunately, being a little naive.
And that's
when
why,
you're dealing with believers.
that's why I gave the pushback, because I am sure, one thing I'm sure of is that there are people within that Highlands congregation that do not have this sinister, this is what we're going to do. We're going to find some cheap land and some, deplorable Negroid area, and we're going to minister to these people. What if some people said, as I said earlier, that we actually want to contribute to the spiritual life and even the practical life of the people in that particular region?
And I do hear what you're saying, and I do agree to a certain degree that there are genuine people who are like, no, we just want to help. And I know that because when you talk to different people, like I think I gave you all the example a couple weeks ago about the brother who was a social worker in Virginia and said, he gets calls from churches all the time like, yo, how can we help? How can we give resources and bodies to doing what y'all are doing? So I get it. But the problem is, if you exist within a particular institution, there's only so much you're going to do. Like we all went to college, right? There's only certain majors you're going to major in because that's all they offer.
That is correct.
You see what I'm saying? So you exist by design. So we exist in those people participate in a particular institution. And so the problem is you're only going to be able to do what that institution is going to allow and what it's designed to do. And the main thrust of any institution, including church institutions, is to keep the institution going. That is number one on the list. Now, that's the unspoken one. Even though it's number one on the list, it's the one that goes the least spoken about. It's the glass ceiling. And so what I'm saying is that anything that would be to a certain detriment to that institution, they're not going to fully do it.
And you're right. There's a huge syncretism that goes to that, because when people say that they're missional minded and whatnot, and they say that they plant churches and all these things, that's one thing. You also have the other way where it's about them. So it's like, okay, so we're gonna spread the gospel in the name of who, right? And it is usually in the name of so and so group that's doing it, and that's not what the Bible commands. That's not what the Bible says. And it really is, to AJ's point, I mean, it's nation building. That's what's happening. It's nation building. They're building their nation.
Yeah, and what you're saying reminds me of what Dr. Anthony Bradley of King's College has been saying about these sorts of church plants.
Yeah.
He says, okay, white Christians, when you have these church plants in these lower income, again, you don't go to higher income colored or
Yeah.
Negroid
Right,
areas,
right.
you go to lower income.
Yes.
When you do those plants, then you bring in people who say, oh, well, we actually want to have more authentic community with the people that we're planting among, so therefore we're going to move into houses in those areas. You're actually spurring on the gentrification that
Yeah.
pushes out the very people
Yeah.
that you claim that you want to minister to.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of what you had said earlier, AJ, which is if you have all those resources, why don't you use those resources and provide them for the ministries that are
like,
already there?
If you care so much, empty out your bank account. If you care so much,
Right.
like if you care so much, then empty out your bank account. Like if you care that much, like there's this idea that.
But that's the institution.
Well,
You're
yeah,
right.
so what I'm saying is like there's the idea that we want you, like we want you to come. You're so guilt ridden that you read about this concept of spreading the world to the spreading the gospel and making disciples to the uttermost part of the earth, right? So you come all the way to my spot, you come all the way to my community, and that's not to say that like there's a lot of assumption there. There's an assumption that I don't know the Lord and the Lord isn't dealing with me outside of you, and like you have to be the medium. That's one thing, and that's very patronizing. That's one thing. But then the other thing is that your community has sin in their camp. Like we're all sitting under this holly weird brainwashing that's taking place and dealing with. We talked about cultural Marxism and critical theory. Why don't you focus on that? Like we got our community. Like we'll deal with this.
And
Why
even
do you
if I didn't
constantly
know
have
that,
to
yeah.
come like try to civilize us when you all have so many things going on in your situation, but you'd rather because it's easier. It's like
It's easier.
It's easier. It's unconquered territory. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you just keep coming and trying like we're good. Just stop messing with us. Like we don't need you. If you care so much about the sins of the past, then cut the check. Otherwise, just leave us alone.
Bounce.
So in other words, help us to do better what it is that we're already
leave us-
doing,
yeah,
or provide it
yeah.
not better, but provide the resources that we need to continue to develop our own communities.
I mean, if you want to live in harmony, like, why do you constantly you don't have to invade. You don't have to do that. That's not how nations work.
or occupy.
Well,
And
you
this
don't
is-
have to occupy, right? Nations aren't supposed to work that way historically until occupation came about, but. And occupation's been going on, but
I was
that's
gonna
not
say,
ever
yeah,
been a
it's
good
been-
thing. That's
it's
not a
never
good
been a
thing.
good thing, yeah.
But the way nations work is you make contributions with other nations, with other lines, with other groups of people. Your group of people puts out a particular item, a product, and you trade with another nation that puts out a particular item or product. You don't have to occupy.
See,
You
but
what I'm saying?
everything that you're saying is 100% true. But this is where my pushback comes from, because as a believer in the Messiah, I am called to a higher way of existing. Nation building, nation existing, nation functioning. Those are all things that have their source in the earth.
Yes.
Where I'm called to have a source that is heavenly, right?
Yes.
So if I see and I examine the way nations function, you say, okay, that's the way nations function. Okay.
Right.
But I am called to a higher way of thinking, behaving,
That is
and
correct.
existing. And so
Absolutely.
what I should be able to see, and listen, everybody who's listening, we're not taking, again, this guy, Michael Jordan, is not exempt. Because this dude is trying to do the exact same thing. He's trying to protect his territory.
Yeah, he's protecting his
not worried
territory.
about the people,
Yeah.
but neither is Highland. So we want to try to paint the picture
Again, we're
on
making
both
assumptions
sides.
about
Yeah.
motives with regard to that.
Eve doesn't want to make those assumptions, but I will make the assumption
I
for
mean,
her.
I can understand someone saying, "What's the true motive of this particular
Right.
pastor?" But maybe he feels like he has something to protect, and it's not just the amount of tithe money coming into his pocket.
It's not just you're right.
Yeah.
But my only
and
reason
I would agree with that.
My
I
only
definitely
reason
agree
to
with that.
suspect their motives is this. If Avery's doing work in a particular part of the area, right? Christian work. We just call it Christian work, whatever he's doing.
believer work.
Yeah. And let's say one day I'm praying or something and I feel like the Lord wants me to really go to that area, right? And then I go to that area and I find out Avery's there. Now, if I truly function as a body, There's no need for me to reproduce what he's doing.
Well, what if you're not reproducing? What if Avery every Sunday is running laps around the church and saying he's getting a blessing for running laps, and you see a theological deficiency there?
That's semantics.
What might you do?
That's semantics. Why? The reason that's semantics, and I know what you're saying because people say that, but that's semantics because if I go there and he says, okay, he's running laps, bump that dude, I'm going to go down the block and plant another church. What does the unbeliever say? Why is there two churches on this block? The unbeliever doesn't say Avery's running laps, but those people are singing hymns. They're better. That's not what the unbeliever says. See,
CCM, contemporary Christian music.
Well, no, sometimes they're just singing old hymns. You know, you don't have to be.
I thought you were talking about the newfangled. I thought you were
like
talking about the newfangled satellite joint. That's the contemporary Christian joint. Excuse me. I'm speaking the truth, bro.
But I'm just saying, see, that's
to
not
the wider community. They just see two churches in one spot, and they still see the projects across the street.
Because you brought up the Great Commission. That's what I'm saying. The Great Commission is the interaction of believers with unbelievers. So what does the unbeliever say when they see Avery's work and they see my work down the block? They say, yo, these churches is tripping, man. It's two churches on this block, but it's a liquor store right here. The hoes and prostitutes are right there, and it's the projects right there. So this is where we get into this semantical argument that really is nonsensical. Yes, I understand your stance on wanting to be so doctrinally sound. I get it, and that has its points. It has its validity. But there is a particular time and place to get into that. Initially, let me go in there and see what these cats are doing, because if I go and do something down the block, it paints the wrong picture to the unbeliever. But that's the institution, right? If the University of Maryland wants to go down there, they just put another campus over there. Yeah. They don't say, hey, what's that other school doing? They don't care. They want to take the students from that other school, right? I'm adjunct faculty at a community college. I can remember being in meetings where they would talk about creating another satellite campus in the south part of the county. Why? Because the southern part of the county, a lot of the students are going to another school. And so, we need to have a presence down there because we're losing students. That's how institutions think.
Yeah. I've been in higher ed for the better part of a decade, and yes, it's about presence. But again, would you understand some people saying, well, the church isn't the same type of institution. It doesn't have the same motives.
They have the exact same characteristics. That's what I'm saying. The characteristics, if you take the religion part out and just look at the characteristics, they're exactly the same.
So what is it that caused you and the other church leaders within your particular former church to say, we're going to disband? What is it that's so special about y'all? What is it that was so conscious and higher order thinking about you guys or conscious, I should say, about you guys that caused you to disband and say, we don't want institution anymore?
I think a lot of people come to that point, and you have to make a decision. I think it's in the book of Joel where it says you're in the valley of decision. Because I've talked to a lot of guys who are church leaders, and they come to that point.
Come on.
They come to that point, but you have to choose. Sometimes you say, you know what? I've invested too much time, invested too much money, invested too much of myself to just give up. So I'm going to keep fighting and try to change things. But you have to make a decision. Now, luckily, a lot of the leaders that I walked with at the time, we realized, you know what? This ain't really popping because it's an institution. It's not biblical in terms of the way it's constructed.
And plus, your parishioners weren't paying your bills, weren't paying your telephone bills.
And we didn't tie
your automobile. Then maybe you could chill.
I was trying to chill.
I don't think you do.
we dating ourselves in this joint. I guarantee you, it's some young people that don't even know that. Yeah.
Okay. You know what? And I wanted to bring up that Beyonce mask. I meant to talk about that, but I ain't trying to change the subject. So we need to speak on this. Not now.
Yeah, not now.
But that's the little hook joint. You know what I'm saying? You know when you watch, you seen like Avengers or whatever, and then
spoiler alert.
Yeah, you see Avengers, and then all of a sudden, you look, and it's like at the end of the joint or somewhere in there, it's like a little cut scene to a random joint. They don't get back to it. Like, oh, that's going to be in the next one. That's all that was. That was a little
cool.
Little shout out to Cutscene joint.
So
yeah.
let's shift and transition to something that it's a little old. It's about a month and a half old, but this was an article in the Christian Post, and it was about the MLK 50. And we had talked about this, the messages from the mountaintop thing. We talked about this before, but there was something that took place at that event that
MLK.
the MLK 50 event that I wanted to talk about. So I kind of
Who's
held
MLK?
off on it.
What's that? What's MLK?
Miles Lewis King, no, I'm sorry, Martin Luther King 50 event, the one that took place right after his birthday.
I mean, this kid's out here. They don't know who Mary J. Blige is. So
You just quoting Beyonce and Destiny's Child. They probably don't know Destiny's
they
Child.
don't know Destiny's Child.
Yeah.
You think somebody gonna know who MLK is?
But yes, this isn't 2018, and everything that happened in 1968 is at the 50 mark right now,
Yeah.
including the 68 Olympics and a lot of other things. But that also includes the unfortunate assassination of Martin
Correct.
Luther King. And so there are a lot of commemorations that have happened over the course of this year so far.
Oh, I'm
including,
sorry, not his birthday. Yes, his assassination.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That
but
was
but
my
it
fault.
includes the event that you're about to talk about.
Yeah. And so, we had mentioned, Matt Chandler and a couple of the other ones a couple months ago. But there was your boy Johnny Piper.
Oh no! Don't
He-
talk about Pipey Pipe. That's my dude.
He spoke at the event. And, honestly, up to this point, I'm literally up to the moment that I read this article, I actually had nothing against this cat. Because I know he's a reformed dude, and I've never been that kind of person, but I could appreciate him for the stuff he did. And I was like, you know what? That's just not my cup of tea. But whatever. To those, to each his own. And then I read this article, and I thought, man, that's not really kosher. So what am I talking about?
Yeah,
John
what
Piper,
article
he's
are you
the
talking about?
founder of DesiringGod.org, and he is the chancellor of Bethlehem College and Seminary. He spoke at this MLK 50 event. All right. He actually gave the closing speech or the closing, remarks or whatever you want to call it. Sermon. Some people say sermon. Some people say speech. And now remember the context of the event. It's to honor the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
I think it's to honor Martin Luther King Jr., but it was
I don't know if you honor the
not-
assassin.
yeah, but it was it's to honor Martin Luther King. Yeah, go ahead and look, edit.
me edit
Okay,
that.
go ahead. It's
Shout out
to do
John
what?
Wilkes
What was
Booth.
the purpose?
No, that's the wrong dude. James
Jesus.
Earl Ray. No, that's the wrong dude.
No, it's James Earl Ray.
Is it James?
Supposedly,
No,
but there's
James
another
Earl Ray.
controversy.
So he popped
regarding
off
that.
two people. He popped off JFK and he popped off
Oh, so no, it's not him.
Ronald
I
Luther
forgot.
King.
Sirhan. I forgot who did
no
what.
Sirhan. He popped off. He popped off the dude
Robert
that-
Francis.
I
Okay.
don't know.
Anyway, go ahead.
It all runs together.
So here we are.
Jackie Robinson got 6 rings.
So
It all runs together.
at this event to honor Martin Luther King on the 50th anniversary of his assassination, he gets up and gives the speech, and I'm like, okay, cool. And he talks about his issues with racism growing up in the South. Because John Piper's from the South. He said he had a sin of being racist, and I guess he sort of kind of repented publicly. Okay, I'm with you. But what I didn't like was he used the opportunity to essentially put a question mark of MLK's faith, salvation, right?
Okay.
And I've heard those things before, so this is not anything new. But the issue that I took with that is, was this the time and place for that? In an event that was designed to honor Dr. Martin Luther King, is this the place and time to want to question his salvation? Now, I think me and Dan had gotten to this one time about this before as well. People want to question MLK's salvation based on the things that he had said when he was young. And we've all said stupid things when we were young, and a lot of things that probably were completely unbiblical when we were younger. So he's, brought up papers that he wrote in his early 20s when he was in seminary. Okay, I got you. How many times have we done things when we were young? You look back like, whew, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And so the point I'm bringing up about one time me and Dan got into it, where a lot of these church leaders that we bring up and that we love to quote, those same sentiments are not brought up. We don't bring up Martin Luther's anti-Semitism.
Or
where he-
Jonathan Edwards'
Yeah.
slaveholding.
where he wrote things about why we should kill all the Jews. Like Martin Luther wrote stuff like that. Why we should bomb their synagogues. Well, not bomb, but blow up or burn down or whatever. But his questioning his faith is never brought up. Now, are those dastardly comments to make? Of course. I don't want to kill any Jewish people or burn down synagogues. But MLK is saying, yeah, I'm not sure that Jesus met John the Baptist when he said he did, or I'm Okay, like that's a weird statement to make. Okay, but he existed in a particular context, and I think Avery and I talked about this. MLK grew up in the early part of the 20th century. Now, if you're telling me a young African American believer in the South in the early part of the 20th century became disillusioned with Christianity in America, that is not surprising to me. That does not surprise me if a young believer who is in seminary becomes disillusioned with Christianity, even though it was a liberal school, becomes disillusioned with Christianity. We know people in the 21st century who are becoming disillusioned with Christianity.
And believe those same things, actually.
Right, and could believe some of those same
originate
things.
from him.
And they not being kicked off buses and having crosses burnt on their yard. And yet they're still becoming disillusioned with Christianity. MLK had to endure all of that. So
your question is, why would John Piper even bring that up? First of all, why bring it up? And then the second thing is, why bring it up on that type of occasion?
Yes.
And my response to that, because I come from there's part of my background is reformed in terms of soteriology and in terms of what it is that we believe theologically, is that you have to look at the context. He's talking to people who question MLK altogether, have questioned MLK's Christianity. And so as a result, Piper took the occasion to say, I myself, Piper says, have sinned in some major areas, just like there are ways that MLK has sinned. Let's be able to look past that and look at what MLK brought to the table in terms of being one of the forerunners of bringing some kind of justice, some kind of dash to the racial caste system that we have in this country. And I think that that's probably it. I don't necessarily agree with his method, but that was probably what was on his mind when he brought these issues up.
And you're probably right. I'm not, because again, like I said, he's entitled to his belief. And if he felt, based on some of the things that he read that Martin Luther King wrote, again, in his early 20s, were questionable, okay, I'm with you. They sound questionable. Yes, you're looking like, okay. But at an event designed to honor the man, I'm just not sure if that was the right forum. That's all I thought. I feel like he tried to co-opt the forum, because how else am I going to get all these people together to spew my rhetoric unless I come to this MLK joint and they're all in the same room? That's just why I was kind of like.
Now, another thing that this speaks to, though, that's just glaring to me, has to do with age. We have to remember also, in spite of what MLK may or may not have believed in his early 20s, MLK didn't make it to middle age.
Right.
And here we have John Piper, who is, I believe, 72 at this point.
At the time, yes.
And so John Piper has, decades upon decades of growth and maturity and development on MLK, just simply because MLK's life was snuffed out. And so, that's another thing that we need to remember when we hear contemporary people providing some kind of commentary on folks who didn't have the benefit of decades of maturity that they themselves had in order to reach certain conclusions.
No, you're exactly right. Because who's to say MLK he was killed in his mid 30s. So who's
Late
to
30s,
say
yep.
he's 37, right?
39. He didn't even get to 40.
So who's to say 15 years later he doesn't look back and say, man, some of the things I was doing when I was in my early 30s or in my early 20s. Right? We all have the benefit to do that because we've lived beyond that. MLK, you're right, did not have that opportunity. So we're left, kind of frozen in time, the things that he did in his early 20s, and he does not have the opportunity to grow and change and retract some of those statements. So again, that's just why I'm kind of like, okay, I get it. You don't jive with the things that he wrote when he was in his early 20s. Here you are, 72, and have had the opportunity to mature. What if Piper was assassinated? We would look back and say, man, Piper was this racist Southern preacher from back in the day. I can't jive with this cat. But no, he was able to grow, mature, and change.
Really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Not that interesting. He wouldn't have been assassinated, but I get you.
But if he had died in a car accident at that age,
he had a heart attack.
Yeah, let's say he had a heart. I'm serious. Let's say he had a heart attack 25 years ago.
Yeah.
We would just know, man, Piper was this racist dude from back in the South. Man, I can't jive with that cat. But we don't have that. We have this fully mature picture now. So that's why I'm like, yeah, dude, say that joint for something else, man. Like, take that, kick rocks with that. I understand that's what you feel and that's what you believe. But come on, you think more holistically about what you're saying.
If we bring this back around to the notion of Black Christianity, aren't any thoughts on your part, on either of your parts, about the people, the audience that we are doing this podcast for, which are those people who have become disillusioned? Are we looking at these different articles to say we understand the disillusionment, or to provide some perspective on it? Any thoughts about that particular audience of people and how they should, or how they do, look at people like John Piper?
Well, you know what? I'm glad you asked that question. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to do disc 2. So if you guys want to hear that answer to that question, I encourage you to jump on over now to disc 2.
Let's get started, I won't cheat you. Let me set apart who is my people. The ones who set in their heart to be believers. Press on to the mark to follow Jesus. When it gets hard, they be seeking the leaders. Fathers that help them heal when they are beaten, or help them see the meaning when they're grieving. Don't follow their feelings that'll be misleading. Yeah, they the ones that keeping it biblical. Keep it 100 when others saying it's fictional. A relational life, that is how it's scriptural. A stay in the light while cats be living typical. Integrity we chose cause folks is hypocritical. Religious midwit, man, that is how they picture you. Wishing you